and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to offer a very warm welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends with us here today, and a very warm welcome to all of you members and good friends. Thank you so much for being here. This year, we've hosted more than 4,000 people from 55 countries to our programs. And so you are all part of a very unique cohort of buyers, sellers, enablers. We have policymakers, we have investors and regulators here today. And about 30% of the attendees are all potential buyers of RegTech. Our recent research, which I'll ask Alison to drop in the chat for you all, revealed that regulatory compliance solutions are in the top 3 most commonly demanded solutions for analysing risk and regulation, monitoring and implementation and governance. There's a couple of things on this slide that are highlighted in our report that I thought were important for us all to know about. And that is that our industry has remained extremely resilient during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we've been busy creating jobs, not only in Australia, but elsewhere. We have more sophisticated investment capital flowing into the sector. And for those of you who've been on this journey for a little while, you'll know that that is one of our key strategies. So that is very gratifying to see more capital flowing in. And about 2/3 of our RegTech members have seen very strong revenue growth since last year. One of our favourite numbers on here is this 23% number. And what that represents is that the time to value, or if you like, the time from the first conversation to full product deployment, we have reduced by 23%. And so it went down from about 14 months in 2019 to an average of 8.4 months this year, which is fantastic. There's lots of opportunities in exports, and we have seen continued strong growth in full production deployments, which is very exciting. The breadth of what you're going to see today in this RegTech Edge showcase is amazing, and for some it may be surprising at the great variety of solutions. The sheer productivity and efficiency that can come about by just understanding these 6 solutions that we have today will, we hope, take your breath away. And I'm going to summarise what you're going to hear. So we're going to see legal and compliance, information and analytics. We're going to see tools to rapidly build digital solutions without writing a single line of code. We're going to see ideas on transforming data into searchable and contextualized information. We're going to see the creation of custom compliance models, regulatory trade and transaction reporting, a consent-driven data sharing platform, and we are going to see operational analytics with traditional rostering and payroll data to automate payroll compliance. So I'd like to acknowledge LexisNexis, Neotologic, Nuix, Traction FinTech Verifier and WageSafe and welcome them to our virtual podium today. And then just before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping things before I introduce you to our fantastic MC. So first things first, I'd like to ask the speakers, please respect the time that has been given to you. We want to ensure that the first speaker and the last speaker get equal time, so please don't go over. When Will gives you your sign and turns his camera on and makes a noise, you will know that you have about a minute to go. I think that's right, but Will correct me if I'm not right on that. And if I could ask everybody to remain on mute and turn your cameras off unless you are presenting, and that's just so we can preserve the bandwidth whilst we're doing the presentations. And then after everything is done, we will invite you to switch back on and we'll do a little bit of online networking at the end of the program. What we're going to do after each presentation, we're going to ask each presenter to jump onto the chat and answer any questions directly that come along. We find this is the most efficient way, and it's driving some really good questions and interactivity. And we'll also be actively inviting our presenters to share any additional information that they would like to throughout, including their online case studies. We'll also be doing some polling during the session, so from time to time you may see a poll pop up. It may or may not relate to the session today, but we'd be really grateful if you could complete it, because we're collecting that data to help us in our future programs, and also to collect some valuable data, that guides us in the important work that we do. So thank you very much for your participation. I'd like now to acknowledge Will Liang from KPMG and thank him for his support in being our MC today. Will has a very fine pedigree, having spent a decade at Macquarie Bank prior to joining KPMG, where he is the national lead for RegTech. So there is no finer person to give us a helicopter view of the landscape as he is seeing it right now, and then he will be our MC and guide our fantastic RegTechs through their presentations. So Will, without further ado, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. Our topic today is regulatory compliance. It's such a massive topic. I only want to spend a few minutes to do a quick light touch on 6 recent trends in this space. Right. So I'll start with regulatory change. So regulatory change is a huge pain and also a huge opportunity. In particular, obligation management is a pain point for organizations globally. Right? Unlike more mature RegTech areas, such as financial risk management, such as regulatory reporting, the adoption of technology in obligation management is still very, very low. In a recent survey that we conducted in KPMG for 170 banks globally, we found only a very small percentage of banks have adopted or have done POC of technology solutions in this space. So there are huge opportunities out there for solution providers to be playing in this field. Number 2, data is a currency for growth. Right? Some organizations are actually getting better at managing their data, in particular regulatory related data. So in fact, from our experience, some of the best quality data set in an organization exist in regulatory compliance or risk management space. The challenge is how to leverage the data for growth. Right? Some organizations are thinking about it. Some organizations are thinking about it. Rarely any organization have actually done anything successful. Again, this is an opportunity area. Number 3, all eyes are on ESG. Right? Such a hot topic at the moment, such a big topic. I'm sure we can all sit here and talk about it until Christmas. So ESG is also really much bigger than just regulatory compliance. But from a regulatory compliance angle, it triggers a very interesting discussion around hard regulation versus soft regulation. So hard regulations, as we know, are laws from the parliament, from the regulators, whereas soft regulation could be industry standard or social contracts even. Now, it's particularly important and common in the ESG space. But if not handled well, there will be significant impacts, as we all know. The question is, as an industry, are we really spend enough time talking about soft regulations as a whole? Number 4, remediation is still a focus. It's been 4 years, almost 5 years since the Banking Royal Commission. But the remediation work is still going very strong. Organizations are spending hundreds of tens of millions of dollars on remediation every year. Having said that, some mindset has shifted from backward-looking remediation to forward-looking monitoring. Right? And the good news is the technology solution they have invested in remediation can be also leveraged for forward-looking monitoring activities. Number 5, information age is over, and welcome to the automation age. COVID-19 has accelerated the adoption of technology, no doubt, and demonstrates how quickly the information age was already giving way to automation age. If I thinking back my conversation with my client in the last 12 months and summarize that with one word, I would say that word is probably automation, right? In all aspects of regulatory compliance and beyond.
We'll go back and check.
And lastly, number 6. This is actually a very recent trend, I must say. In the last few weeks, a new trend what I call the great resignation is there, but are we prepared? Interestingly, Deborah and I actually kind of predicted this 18 months ago. We did a podcast together when the pandemic has just started. The term great resignation came from United States. Pandemic led to millions of people, from frontline workers to senior executives, voluntarily leaving their jobs. According to a recent study by Microsoft, more than 40%, that's 40% of global workforce are considering leaving their jobs, leaving their employers this year. Some due to pandemic consideration, right? Thinking about their life, thinking about what's important in their life. Some thinking about flexible working arrangement, and some thinking about a salary, for many, many different reasons. But what does it actually mean for regulatory compliance and the RegTech industry? I think there are three impacts. Number one, in the long term, the great resignation will highlight the importance of certain regulatory compliance areas. One obvious one, again, is ESG, right? People are thinking about whether the company's value is really aligned with my personal value, and whether the work they do has a purpose. More people will choose to work for a company that has a good social purpose. Number two, again, long term, it will improve RegTech adoption. The traditional way of adding headcounts to solve an issue is not only inefficient, but also becomes impossible. In the age of great resignation, technology adoption is really the only way to achieve regulatory compliance. And lastly, in the short term, however, the great resignation has increased the hiring cost of employers, hence the bottom line of a company. It also increased the workload of the remaining employees, consequently creating a challenge in RegTech adoption in many organizations. So that was my quick take in regulatory compliance. Can you relate to any of those areas? Has the great resignation impacted your company, for example? Happy to chat about this offline. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Today, we have 6 innovative companies, as Deborah mentioned, on the call to talk about their solutions. Many will touch on the topics I've just discussed. They will have 5 minutes each. And if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please leave in the chat. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce our very first speaker. I believe it's Michael Nelson from LexisNexis. Michael, you have the microphone now.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank you everyone for taking the time out to join us today to take part in what I hope will be a useful and informative afternoon away from your desks. We'll start with LexisNexis. For those of you who have had any sort of legal training, you will have come across LexisNexis under one of the other things that we do, which is legal research. About 5 years ago, however, we formed the view that the people who are really good at looking at case law and legislation and providing meaningful commentary on that to the legal profession would also be really good at looking at case law and regulatory guidelines and prudential standards and providing meaningful commentary for people who work in compliance like us. So over the course of the past 5 years, we've looked at different sorts of ways that we can assist people, not just in their sort of corporate governance standards, but also in their industry compliance needs as well, by building out a whole variety of different things that we think can help you. Next slide, please. So, one of the fundamental problems that anyone who works in the compliance space today will be alive to is the picture that you're looking at the screen now. Legislative change is flowing out of the nation's parliaments at an enormous rate. Admittedly, 2020 was slightly down on 2019, but as you can see, there were more than 4,500 legislative changes across the nation's parliaments last year alone, and I suspect that this year we'll see a similar sort of number. Now, probably 20 or 30 years ago, it was possible to manage this by yourselves. It was possible to, as Will mentioned, throw people at the problem. But one of the issues that people are facing today is this. Firstly, how do you identify the changes that are coming which will be relevant to you and your current obligation set. Secondly, how do you update the obligations in your current register to reflect those changes? Thirdly, how do you manage that flow of information and marry it up to your existing policies, procedures, controls, and risks, such that you can adequately identify what changes there are and what it means for your organization? And finally, how do you communicate the effect of those changes to the broader organization such that compliance isn't tightly held within your compliance team, but everyone across the organization knows what compliance looks like and how they're meant to interpret it and what they're meant to do about it. Next slide, please. So, currently a significant proportion of the nation's organisations, and I'm familiar with Australia, and we are doing more and more work in the UK, and to be honest, it's a similar issue over there, is that people are trying to manage this themselves. So what they're trying to do is form some sort of meaningful tapestry from the threads of information that they gather up over the course of any given day. So that can be peak body emails or attending seminars like this, subscribing to legal firms' emails, attending industry webinars, subscriptions, professional association accreditations, internal review of legislation and regulation, Excel spreadsheets that try and capture all of that they can then share across the business, and also going out to panel law firms or external legal advisors who can try and share their insight and wisdom into what you need to do. But as you can imagine, and I'm sure as a lot of people on the call will understand, it's a very difficult job to do it yourselves. Even if you throw significant resources at it in terms of time and people and money, there's still no real guarantee that you'll be able to create some sort of harmonized view of what compliance looks like for your organization from these competing voices, all of whom have different needs themselves, have different interpretations, different views, and ultimately it becomes very, very hard to try and form some sort of coherent unison out of the varying competing voices that you're all trying to listen to and understand. So, next slide, please. We have a solution, I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear. So what LexisNexis has done is taken an approach that steps away from the traditional models of interpreting section by section, paragraph by paragraph, all of the legislation and the prudential standards and guidelines that you currently consider to be relevant to your organization, parsing through that information and trying to identify where obligations might fall on the organization that you work for. We've turned that around and gone, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Are you a bank? Do you have an AFSL? Do you work with universities, for example? Do you work in the government sector? We look at all of the obligations that arise in those particular spaces and provide you with clear, concise, meaningful, practical guidance about what compliance looks like. We provide you with support in terms of setting up obligation monitoring through our alerting solution. We provide you with advice in terms of structures and what we call our remediation fields that allow you to set up procedures that will help you maintain compliance. We provide it in clear English, so you don't necessarily need to go through legislation and translate it into something that makes sense to the broader organization. And of course, because we're LexisNexis, we're supported by some of the finest legal minds in the country and overseas, so you can be confident that the quality of the information that you're receiving has been reviewed and vetted and approved by lawyers who work in industry and work with clients on a day-to-day basis, so they themselves can bring their knowledge to the understandings of the issues that you hopefully will never face. We work with industry partners such that when you want to receive our content, you can either receive it natively from us, or you can push it through any number of GRC platforms such that you can begin to, as Will mentioned, make the process automatic. You can identify the obligations that are relevant to you. You can understand when obligations change due to regulatory change, and you can push all of that content out to the broader organization. I hope today's been useful. If you have any further information, please feel free to visit the links on the website, and I will now pass you back to Will. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Michael. I believe there's some question already for you waiting in the chat. And just remind the audience, if you have any questions for any of the speakers, please use this chat function. Can I please invite the next speaker from Logic? Mark, you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks very much, Will. And thanks everyone for having us today. Hong, next slide, please. And you'll ask, why are we here? We're here because your compliance needs are actually pretty unique. And while you share a lot in common with your colleagues, competitors in your respective markets, your existing software meets only part of those needs, of your needs and your competitors' needs. Next slide, thanks, Hong. So where does Logic fit in? We're the leading no-code platform for the automation of process, documents, and expertise. Next slide, thanks, Hong. So you say, well, what does that mean in practice? What we're talking about is putting software development tools in the hands of your risk and compliance teams. So risk and compliance professionals building web applications themselves across these domains: expertise, risk analysis, process workflow automation, and document report automation. So in the law firm and consulting firm space, that's bespoke onboarding workflows, targeted, like customized AML KYC processes, remediation and claims assessment workflows like we've talked about just now with Will, really large scale due diligence review workflows, through to things in insurance, so policy management, claims triaging, handling process, premium calculators, underwriting decision tools, and a big, close to our hearts and our origin story is in corporate legal as well. So contract lifecycle management and obligations management too. Next slide, thanks, Hong. So why do this? Why build and deploy your own digital solutions to meet your specific risk and compliance needs? Well, you get massive productivity uplift. There's a lot of value sitting there on the table. It increases the scale of your operation and you're saving a lot of time and FTE and dealing with the great resignation that Will flagged at the beginning. We're addressing blind spots with self-service tools, those things that keep you up at night that you're not actually covering very effectively at this point, because they're always running 24/7. Business users, clients, customers can access these tools that you deploy and access those 24/7. But why do no code? Thanks, Hong. Back to the last slide. Thanks, Hong. Why do this on a no code basis? Why build your own software? Because it's faster, it's easier to maintain, it's cheaper than having software developers do it for you. And importantly, you're completely taking away that barrier between subject matter expertise and the development capability. So the person who's the expert in this subject matter is building the application that serves your business. Next slide, thanks, Hong. If you can hit play on the video. So what you can see here is the runtime experience. So an application built to run in the browser, and this is a user working through an application built with Logic. In this case, the user's getting an assessment of a potentially reportable event, answering some questions, text inputs, list select questions, dates, times, things like that, interacting with other data sources to give them some advice. They've got a reportable situation that gives rise to an obligation to report to ASIC. Next slide, thanks, Hong. If you can hit play on that video too. You might say, well, how do we build these tools? How do you build applications like this that run in the browser? You do it with tools like Logic Canvas. So they are drag and drop no-code tools where you can define questions, prompt users to provide structured data. It's a very straightforward way. You can learn these tools in minutes to build really powerful self-service applications. You can not just asking questions, you're building in quite sophisticated rules that might evaluate, say, conduct risk. So in a potential breach reporting context, you're evaluating kind of those grey area conduct risk type situations in a standardized and auditable way. Next slide, thanks, Hong. It's not just standalone applications though. So with workflow capabilities, you can actually string together these applications, these actions over time and across a whole series of players and teams. So not only are you having kind of one hit, one interaction in the browser, you're actually generating data from an initiating user, passing that action along. Based on criteria like risk-weighted scores, you're triaging to different people in the business or external to the business to get the help and the attention that this matter needs, whatever it might be. And again, you've built and maintained this workflow decision risk analysis solution yourself using no-code tools. Next slide, thanks, Hong. This is all supported by no-code database infrastructure. It's called Neota Data Manager. You do not need to know how to set up or administer a database. You can essentially create a solution and a database will spin up in the background, connect to it for you. That gives you really great opportunities in the audit, but also the analytics space. Next slide, thanks, Hong. 15 seconds left. This is just one example of an AML risk analysis kind of consulting tool that allows people to analyse a new product or service or business process, business practice that's built by one of our customers. One of the many things you can build yourself. Next slide, thanks Hong. And the last, lucky last, are my contact details. Please just get in touch. I'd love to give you a demonstration of Neurologic, kind of talk about use cases and how you can build those tools that you've always loved or wanted to have but never been offered before. So please get in touch. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Love it. Oliver, are you there? Can I please introduce our next speaker from Nuix, Oliver Harvey, who is the Global Head of GRC Solutions in Nuix. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As Will mentioned, my name is Oliver Harvey. I'm the Nuix Global Head of Governance, Risk and Compliance Solutions. I've been at Nuix for around 6 months now. Prior to that, I was the Chief Supervisory Officer at the Australian Securities and Investment Commission and was responsible for supervising a number of the major financial institutions in the Australian financial market, and principally with a focus on their governance, risk and compliance issues. And one of the consistent challenges that I repeatedly found when working with the group executives and the boards of those organisations was their inability to clearly identify at the earliest possible stage the kind of data and information that would alert them to the kind of risks that we saw subsequently reveal themselves during the Royal Commission, and continuing to be clearly areas of ongoing focus both for regulators and for financial institutions alike. So my real question was, with that concern in mind, what are the solutions out there that would better enable organisations to do that? And having given it considerable thought, Nuix was clearly an area of focus for me, and why I chose to make the decision to join Nuix 6 months ago. If I could just have the next slide, Hong, please. So who is Nuix? Nuix is a publicly listed global innovative software organisation with a primary focus on data analytics and the technology that underpins it. As I mentioned, we are global. We operate in around 80 different countries with 1,000 different customers across both the public and the private sector, and I'll get onto that shortly. The next slide, please. So what does Nuix do? I've given you a brief illustration of the kind of stuff that Nuix does, but really what Nuix does is set out in the workflow at the top of that slide there. And it does all this at extraordinary scale and extraordinary speed with extraordinary forensic precision. So Nuix has the software to go out and collect data from all sorts of different repositories within your organisations at an enormous scale. Having found that information, it then brings that information or collects that information with extraordinary, again, precision and speed, but specifically the kind of information that you want. And we'll get onto some examples, but you might want to, for example, find the sensitive data, whether that be private information or particular IP that you want managed properly and effectively. And then it brings that into an environment that enables you to search it. And we touched on this briefly when Deborah gave her introduction, but Nuix's ability to enable you to search information is supported by a number of patents. And essentially what Nuix does in a way that no other technology does in the marketplace, and I'm confident in saying that, is enable you to search across thousands of different file types. So your ability to search across photographs and PDFs and emails and attachments to emails and chat information to find the kind of information, like I said, that's either a risk concern or might alert you to the fact that you have an emerging problem that you need to jump on and deal with to ensure it becoming a significant issue that would either destabilise both your organisation from a commercial perspective or from a reputational risk perspective. Nuix then has extraordinary analytics capabilities, which then allows you to draw all sorts of conclusions and inferences and insights from that data that you've been able to search, and then is able to remediate that data, whether it be redacting it, deleting it, moving it, promoting it to another environment. The next slide, please. So let me just give you an example. And I think one of the things that leaps out from these examples is the return on investment. And we touched on, Will, you mentioned automation, and at the same time, the need for software to do more of the work, because quite simply, with the Great Resignation, there are less people to do it. We did some work for a large bank, identifying tax file numbers to ensure that that bank was able to meet the Privacy Act requirements to redact tax file numbers once they were no longer in use. We swept through 240 million documents pretty easily in the course of a number of days and ensured that really significant piece of work was delivered efficiently on time and with relatively minimal cost and expense to an organisation when you consider the magnitude of the challenge they faced. With a big government agency, we swept through a mere 800 million documents, all with a view to ensuring better data risk management within that institution. They were concerned that in the event of an almost inevitable cyber incident or a data breach, that they were going to be exposed and hadn't properly managed the kind of sensitive information that they maintained in buckets, and they wanted to get a proper data governance arrangement introduced into that organisation, and obviously locating the sensitive information that they held was the first cab off the rank. And quite frequently, Nuix supports organisations with their investigations, and again, 500 million documents in that example is another instance. And when you look at the regulatory changes that have been introduced around breach reporting and the expectation that regulators have about being more data and technology enabled to get to the issue faster, equally in the context of customer complaints, and the broader regulatory expectation around ensuring that regulators, that you can identify systemic issues across your complaints, and Nuix software has a lot to say there too. How does Nuix do it? Briefly whiz through the ease of use, the customised layouts, very easy to manipulate and develop for your own purposes. And then the final slide, please. And who does Nuix do it for? We're very proud to say Nuix does it for an extraordinary array of stellar customers domestically and internationally, and in all walks of the economy, from the public sector to the private sector. Thank you so much for your time. Please do get in contact with me. I have my details at the front of the slide pack, but please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or any other form. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Very impressive case studies in particular you've given there. For anyone have question to Oliver, please leave in the chat. Can I please give a warm welcome to Justin? Justin, you're there from Traction? Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Over to you.
Terrific. Thanks. My name is Justin Blake. I'm from Traction FinTech. Next slide, please. So you might wonder who are these Traction FinTech? So our main goal, pretty much our only goal, is to do your reporting for you if you're a market participant and have to report to regulators. So we'll work with you. We'll get your data. We'll get it into the right format, and we'll get it to the regulators so that you're compliant. Next slide, please. So. As the slide says, a lot of financial participants, believe it or not, are not aware of their regulatory reporting obligations. You'd hope everyone was, but I can tell you from experience, I often get phone calls from people who are in a panic because they've suddenly realized that they haven't been reporting properly. So we'll if somebody gives us a call, we can talk them through the whole process. We can tell them whether or not they should be reporting, how they should be reporting, what they should be reporting. So if you are a market participant, there's a very good chance that there is information that you have to submit to the regulators. As has been said before, there is the option, of course, to try and handle all these things internally inside your company. But you can throw a huge amount of resources and time into at a problem like this, and still, in the end, not have a satisfactory solution. Even if you do end up with a satisfactory solution, this is an industry where regulations change so quickly. So you could develop a system, you could be compliant, and in 6 months, that system may be obsolete, and you may have to develop it again. And worse still, in 6 months, you may not be aware that it's obsolete. So you're taking a huge risk of getting in trouble with the regulators if you haven't kept up to speed with the regulations. So that's where we come in. We're a delegated third party, which is an option for market participants to have a delegated third party process and report their trading information for them. Next slide, please. So we break down our the way that we help our businesses into 4 steps. So we'll help you understand the relationship between your business and the regulator, which products need to be reported and such. We'll go through on a product by product basis. In certain regulatory regimes, there are products that do need to be reported, others where it doesn't need to be reported. And then, of course, how it's reported, what information needs to go along with those trades is very important. We will report these trades on your behalf. So we connect to your system, we take the data, we prepare it, and then we will actually submit it on your behalf to a trade repository or an approved reporting mechanism. Now, both of those are more or less the same thing. It's just a method to get the data to a regulator. But in Australia, we call them trade repositories, and in some other countries, they're authorized reporting mechanisms. And then after we've made the submission, If there's any errors that come back from the trade repository or ARM, we will investigate those issues. We'll rectify them where we can on our own, and if not, we'll get in touch with our clients, speak to them, figure out what data is insufficient in their submission, and we'll submit corrections for that. Next slide, please. So we have already a lot of systems for raw data extraction from a lot of trade platforms. We have a lot of the main platforms that are being used. In addition to that, we are always developing new connections for customers who have systems that we haven't encountered before. We'll work with them to figure out the best way to get the data out of their system. In the odd event when they have a system where it's impossible to get the data out through a direct connection, they can always submit by file. The other possibility is some companies are very sensitive about external connections to their system, so they like it to be segregated. In that case, we'll help them with a system to export and then be imported separate to their system. Then we'll do the data extraction, conversion, enrichment. We only need a fairly small number of columns from a client compared to what actually has to be submitted. To some trade repositories and regulated, you need hundreds of fields. A lot of these won't apply to certain product types. We'll tell you which ones don't apply. And we can also then take a very small handful of fields, and using our lookup tables and our enrichment processes, we can then fill out the rest of the data that you require. We also give consultancy services so that we can tell you when more information is required, what is required, how you should best go about it. We then submit to the regulator via the ARM or the trade repository. The output files, we grab them. We have automatic systems to check for errors. We'll investigate those errors, and then we'll provide the final feedback to the client. Next slide, please. New area in a lot of places in Europe. It's a requirement. In Singapore, it's becoming a requirement soon, and in Australia, it's being talked about. Best execution monitoring. So this is where you have to monitor, if you're a brokerage, to see that you're giving a fair price to your clients. We've got a tool that allows you to compare all your trades to reference pricing and see that you're complying with that. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for everyone listening. And I'll stick around for the questions after.
Thank you very much, Justin. So let's Justin from Traction. If you do have questions for Justin, please leave in the chat. Lisa, are you there? Lisa, yep, just kindly remind me the Freedom Day in Melbourne just now. Welcome, Lisa, the CEO of Verifier. Over to you.
Thanks, Will, and thanks everyone for the time today. To talk about what Verifier is doing to support regulatory compliance in responsible lending and design and distribution. So today we're going to be talking about a financial wellbeing customer monitoring tool, which we call Safe Loan. Next slide, please, Hong. And before I get into the solution, interestingly, we build everything at Verifier. We're a consent-driven data sharing platform. So our goal is to give people access to their data to get better outcomes. It just so happens that in this case, that solves problem one that Will raised about automation. So we're building for a world it's coming faster than 2025 that needs to be human-centric and digital first, and cannot assume that compliance is handled by humans. Next slide, please. And then the other thing we're solving for is another thing that Will touched on, which was regulatory uncertainty. So we've done an awful lot of work and believe that RegTechs have a major role to play in helping create an industry-level evidence base in areas that are problematic. And so in this case, if you've watched the Australian market, you will know that the area of lending, between the uncertainty about responsible lending and then the new design and distribution laws, has been a bit tricky. And basically we think there's a gap, and it's called, if you think about it as a public health issue, the gap is there's no road toll measure for responsible lending. So enter Verifier. Next slide, please. So what we're doing here is we're giving borrowers the ability to give you data that you need to manage your portfolios while giving them financial wellbeing insights at the same time. So I'm talking about the right-hand side of this slide. So we're talking about a RegTech plug-in to your borrowing communication during the life cycle of the loan. Now on the left-hand side, I would be remiss not to talk about our first product, which is our frictionless proof of income product, which is only available in Australia at the moment, which is basically the two go hand in hand, radically streamlining upfront and then borrower monitoring of financial wellbeing and a feedback loop, as you would expect, powered by AI. All right, next slide, please. There's an awful lot of words I've just said, but let's get down to it. If RegTech seems awfully tech heavy, but basically, if you're a lender and you can do outbound email or SMS to your borrower base, you can do the Safe Loan program, because all you have to do is invite people to do it, and we basically take care of the rest, because this is a little like a private voting booth for them to self-assess, score out of 100 their financial well-being. And it's really, really simple. The survey is less than 4 minutes. Next slide, please. But it's under the hood. It's pretty cool and pretty exciting, and it's coming from two bases. So we're working here with the Melbourne Institute, which is a think tank out of the University of Melbourne. They've done some incredibly globally leading work around financial wellbeing, and the scales that they've been working on have been tested globally. So this is a global tool. We've overlaid lending norms and our insights into how lenders can influence those outcomes. And there's too little time to talk about the top right-hand box, but that's the work of our think tank on responsible lending. Next slide, please. So the cool next bit is that we're enabling, and we've just been announced to be part of a global open banking challenge on this, where we can give Lisa, if I'm the borrower, the ability to self-assess, and I'll get my score of wellbeing out of 100, and then I get the opportunity to reality check that with banking data. So next slide, please. Strangely enough, and this is research coming out of the Melbourne Institute, which is published, you could basically put borrowers into 3 categories. A third are happy and they know it, a third are really unhappy and they know it, and a third are really confused. Now, here's the opportunity. Insights coming from this financial wellbeing monitoring can be given in real time back to the person and giving them access to resources to help empower them. But the beauty of this is at the same time, we create aggregated insights that help portfolio managers manage 2 things, originations and also product design. So if you see pockets of difficulty emerging in the portfolio, you can course correct. So the coolness of this is you're giving direct value to the person, but at the same time, they're giving you value, all consent driven. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell then, what are we bringing to the table? Well, we're helping you streamline originations fairly. We call it frictionless and fair. We're giving you continuous monitoring of your effectiveness of your loan origination and where it needs a tweak. We're helping you mitigate reputational and legislative risk. And really importantly, we're helping the industry change the game in the sense that we create also pooled results with our academic partners to try and actually help support policymakers to really take an evidence base to what they do in the regulatory space. And then what you need to bring us your customers, because our job's to help support them. Really exciting. We've just published, and if you want it, please ping Deborah on here, Deborah Cruz. We have just presented our insights paper #1 from this, and we're reaching the people who need it. So if someone's in denial, they actually tend to do this survey and get access to resources. But in addition to that, you just need to bring your outbound comms capability that we know you've got for marketing and yourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa from Verifier. May I invite our last speaker, certainly not the least, Steve Champion from WageSafe, who is a co-founder of the company, to tell us all about wage compliance.
Thanks very much, Will. I'm one of the co-founders of WageSafe, and WageSafe solves a problem that's had lots of media coverage in recent years, that is employees not being paid their correct entitlements. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's got the name of wage theft, which sort of implies that it's deliberate non-compliance, but in our experience, most of it is purely accidental. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is a quote from Kate Carnell, who was a previous small business and franchising ombudsman, and she was responding to a Senate inquiry, and she was saying that RegTech is a potential game changer for small businesses trying to navigate Australia's complex regulatory system. Obviously, her focus is smaller businesses. She said it would be particularly useful in the industrial relations space, where RegTech solutions could ensure small businesses are paying wages and entitlements correctly and on time. And she recommended that the Fair Work Ombudsman accredit RegTech solutions for the purpose. Next slide, thanks. So what's the problem we're actually solving? We haven't actually seen, and we've actually, ER Strategies, my base business or previous or current business, we've done more than 2,000 payroll audits, and not once we found a payroll system that can make paying people, their employees being paid correctly. They can't ensure it. That's been the problem. And the causes, things like payroll silos, where different systems don't talk to each other, complex interpretations of awards. When you're doing a payroll audit, you're looking retrospectively, and maybe 12 months, 2 years, 3 years down the track, you're saying, oh, by the way, you've been underpaying your people incorrectly all this time. You've got a massive back pay. And there can be incomplete knowledge, say, in a franchise system, where the franchisor doesn't always know what the what the franchisees are doing. Next slide, please. The result of all that is brand damage. Some major brands have been up there: Woolies, Coles, Bunnings, but also the ABC, a lot of our universities, National Library, all getting this slagged with this term of wage theft. Next slide, please. So what does our solution do? It provides automated real-time reviews of what people are being paid. We identify discrepancies and say, you've underpaid this person, overpaid that one. And we also provide predictive analytics to help businesses understand where issues are likely to happen. That's particularly useful in a franchise network, for example. We don't necessarily know what every franchisee is doing. Next slide. So our solution, the idea is to reduce risk for brands by de-risking payroll compliance management, reducing the cost through automation. Our approach, we've got proven knowledge of interpretation of awards and enterprise agreements. We do a real-time every payroll calculation to show whether people have been paid correctly. Every employee is checked, and it's all built on a customizable, market-leading platform as a service platform. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of a picture of one of our dashboards, just showing the sort of information we provide. You can drill into all of these to show, okay, that particular outlet in this situation, drill into it, look at each individual employee, where they're being underpaid. Is it their base rate? Is it overtime? Is it allowance? They're not getting paid, all those sorts of things. We can also do salary calculations on a per week, per month, 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, whatever you want, to show whether people are being paid their correct salaries or not, which is a new sort of creation that the Fair Work Commission threw at us recently. Next slide, please. We also use AI to identify areas of particular risk, and because we've got access to all the different databases for our clients via their using APIs to point of sale systems, time and attendance, payroll, financial systems, we can give a lot of insights as well into how the business is performing. Next slide. So the WageSafe leadership team, we've all been in business in separate businesses for more than 20 years. We've recently come together to form WageSafe, and what we're doing, I think, is it's a novel application of existing technologies to solve a real problem that's been around for a number of years. And by giving that real-time auditing of payroll, we can tell whether people are being paid correctly. That's the last bit. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the presentation, and thank you, everyone. Deborah, can I invite you back to the virtual stage to close?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Will, for keeping us on time. I wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to Michael, Mark, Oliver, Justin, Lisa and Steve. Thanks so much. Not only contributing today, but you're actually contributing to the industry as a whole, and I thank you very much for that. And what we promised you was the diverse range of solutions, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. You know, RegTech is such a broad universe of things, and I get so excited by, you know, attending these and learning something myself. I couldn't agree more, Will. Regulatory change is a pain, automation is key, but the great resignation. Let's do a follow-up podcast on that to see what we said in the because I think it was very in the early stages, wasn't it, of the pandemic when we did that podcast. We'd love to do a follow-up and benchmark what we said. We've got a bunch of very exciting things coming up, and I'm just going to quickly whip through those, but some of them are super important. And then what I'm going to invite you all to do is turn your cameras and your mics on, and what we'll do is a little bit of networking at the end. So a couple of things. Keep an eye out for our next RegTech Edge No Borders program. We've got AML, CTF coming up next week. We've got Conduct and Culture in November. We have our RegTech Awards on the 30th of November, but importantly, nominations are still open. And I'm thinking that there were at least 6 firms today who presented, and so perhaps they might like to consider nominating for one of the many awards on offer. So those nominations are open, I think, until the end of October. So please do put something in, and at a glittering online event on the 30th of November, we will deliver those awards alongside our AGM and announce our new board appointments. On the 7th of December, we have RegTech as government is a buyer of RegTech called RegTech for Better Government. And for those of you that were on the line a little bit earlier, you might have heard me say we have a fantastic program, and we've got lots of government coming along to actually present case studies of where they've rolled out RegTech solutions. And we've also got some industry leaders from all kinds of different departments like Attorney General, DISA, the Fair Work Commission. We've got, I can't remember all of them, but there's lots of them. And it's being our opening presentation is with Minister Victor Dominello from New South Wales Customer Service. So we're very excited by that. So check that out. And last but not least, 5th, 6th and 7th of April 2022 is Accelerate RegTech. And I'm not going to give too much away because we're going to formally launch it on the 30th of November. But one of the things that I might get Alison to pop in the chat right now is actually the sponsorship prospectus. If you would like to elevate your brand to the stratosphere, we're hoping to top 1,500 registrations this year from all over the world. So it's a great place if you'd like to amplify your brand, and Al will put the prospectus in the chat now. So I think that is all from me. And what I'll invite you to do, if you'd like to turn your camera and your mic on, please stay with us for another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll formally close. But for now, we can stop the recording, and I just invite everybody to come on for a chat. Thanks.